Dennis Hayes is Emeritus Professor of Education at the University of Derby and Director of the campaign group Academics for Academic Freedom. On behalf of that organisation, Professor Hayes recently submitted written evidence to the Public Bill Committee for the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Bill, currently progressing through Parliament, and which I expect we will talk about today. Dennis is also on the advisory board of the Free Speech Union, and a couple of weeks ago was the co-convener of the Buxton incarnation of the Battle of Ideas Festival. Dennis is well known for his controversial 2008 The Dangerous Rise of Therapeutic Education, a book which Routledge reissued with a new introduction in their Education Classic series in February 2019. His latest book, The Death of Academic Freedom, Free Speech and Censorship on Campus, will be published by Routledge in spring next year, 2022. So Dennis, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me again.
Well, it was a pleasure to talk to you last year, and I'm sure it will be an equal or even greater pleasure this year. So let's kick off the questions with really a follow-on from last. When we talked this time last year, you mentioned that students at quite a few universities were then starting free speech societies. So the question is, has that continued, or did it stall or even go into reverse?
Well, that was a really interesting question because it made me reflect on what had happened. And at first I thought it's the pandemic, just mentioned the pandemic, and obviously students were working from home and free speech societies didn't function. And that if you're setting up a free speech society now, you set it up in a very hostile environment, much more hostile and threatening than ever before. If you think of recent cases, obviously Kathleen Stock at Sussex, David Miller at Bristol, and then last night even the Israeli ambassador was attacked leaving a debate at the LSE. So students working in any university are conscious that there are groups out there that are going to make their lives very, very difficult if they start just to have debates. Not to say anything controversial, to have debates. But that said, they are starting to regroup, and the Open University Free Speech Society has just been formed, and Liberate the Debate have become active again in the Free Speech Champions, which is a spin-off from the Free Speech Union and the Academy of Ideas, is setting up groups and individual students to campaign for free speech and academic freedom throughout the UK. But I still think it's a difficult environment. Students are much more nervous than they were. So I'm less positive than I was because it has simply got so hostile. I mean, the Kathleen Stock case has been everywhere about the harassment she received on campus. So I think it's not going to be as easy as it was. And I know that some students, but I hope that's only going to be temporary, but at the moment I'm not optimistic.
Dennis, for those of us who haven't caught up with the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Bill, can you give us a quick guide to the good bits and its shortcomings, and perhaps take on board the issues you have raised in your written evidence?
I was tempted to say there are no good bits, but there are three very important things in it. One, which is that it shows that the government have recognised that there's a free speech. That is important. The downside of that, of course, is that now people see it as a Tory bill and free speech as a Tory initiative, which is absurd, but they do that. So, but it is a really important recognition. So, I mean, I think that's what kicked the bill off. And secondly, it's brought the students' unions within the remit of the law. So previously, they would always say we are independent democratic institutions, we're separate from the university. And that would allow them to have their own meetings and form people without any challenge from the university. But really that's a deception, because students nowadays are on every committee in every part of the university. They're effectively the students' union, I mean, not the day-to-day students, but ordinary students. They're on every committee in the university. They're in fact part of the university. When we did the spiked free speech rankings, we judged the students' union and the university both at the same time, because they were really hard to separate. But now they also have a duty to so that, and the third point, which follows on from that really, is that universities and students' unions now have a duty, a legal duty, to promote free speech. So that's the change. They have the duty to promote free speech. And already we have the Russell Group of Universities reacting to this and making statements about free speech, something that didn't happen before. So I think they're the main changes that I would see are positive. On the negative side, and it's a bit mixed, is the appointment of well, it used to be a free speech champion, but it's now going to be a director of free speech and academic freedom at the Office for Students. And the Office for Students is, the governing body for universities. And this director will have the responsibility to set up a system by which complaints really can be received from anybody who thinks that their right to free speech has been denied by the university. So it's going to be a complex bureaucratic system. So the idea that if you feel your rights have been been denied as at a university because some people were offended, that you will go to court and be able to sue the university is not going to be as clear as it was, because you'll be enmeshed in this bureaucratic quasi-legal system. And I think that's not going to be a healthy situation, because instead of winning the battle for free speech about different issues, people are going to be spending all their time dealing with, because they won't be able to sue the university, I'm absolutely sure, though a lot of this has to be worked out, until they've gone through this Office for Students procedure. And the point I made about that in our submission is that there's a lot more censorship that goes on in universities that never reach the open debate, because we deal with cases all the time where staff get accused of doing something, of behaviour. If they're going through a disciplinary procedure, it's covered by confidentiality clauses. If you look at, we gave examples of them, most universities state very clearly that if you make a matter public without just cause, that will be another disciplinary charge. So if somebody gets suspended for gross misconduct, which can lead to sacking, and they make that public because they think they're being unjustly treated, that's a second gross misconduct charge, and they could be sacked. So this happens all the time. And even when things get settled, there is a shadow university, a secretive university that goes on. And that's not being challenged by this act. And although we did mention it, it hasn't been dealt with. And I think what the act will do, and you can already see, you're trying to think of reasons why it's not a good thing. Well, two people recently, Joe Phoenix and Lisa Keogh, are taking action against universities, for good reason perhaps. Joe Phoenix is taking action against the Open University, Lisa Keogh against Abertay University. But you can see that's what will happen now. Instead of fighting for free speech, you're going to simply go into a legal procedure. And I don't think that's going to be a healthy situation, because we deal with lots of employment situations in which, we have this frustration of not being able to make things public. And I think, and also it's so time consuming. If you think we deal with cases of gross misconduct for simple matters of speech that somebody was offended by, I don't think that's a healthy situation, because what the legislation is going to do is stop people fighting for free speech. So instead, they're not going to fight for the democratic right of free speech. They're just going to apply the law. So they'll be saying, did you break the law? Did this happen? And you can imagine universities are so bureaucratic, they love this. So instead of having a debate about free speech, they will just have a debate about whether you brought this aspect of the law. And of course, a lot of things are not yet settled in the bill. I mean, just to give you one example that caused a lot of discussion in the draft bill, which was the idea that academics' freedom is restricted to the area of their expertise, their field of expertise. Now, if that happens, of course, you can't talk about other disciplines, and you can't do what the UNESCO recommends. Teaching in higher education from 1997 said, you can't criticize your own institution. So you were just restricted to talking about your discipline. And I can imagine everybody would have thought that was wonderful. University managers don't mind what you say about Aztec anthropology in your class, but don't criticize us. That's the sort of situation. But now what they've done in response to the criticisms that I made and James Murray made and James Tooley made, is they've added the old legal statement that academics have freedom within the law to question and test received wisdom and put forward controversial or unpopular opinions without finding themselves at risk of losing their jobs or any privileges they have at the university. So they've added that to and within your field of expertise. So it's a bit sort of cobbled together, and you can imagine that's going to have to be settled in casework about whether you're in your field of expertise, whether you're using your more broader right to free speech. So the jury, is out on how it will work, but the jury isn't out on the fact that it will shift academics and others away from defending free speech and just looking at aspects of the law.
One of your suggestions in your written evidence was that mandatory training on controversial topics be replaced by open debate. Now, I presume you had things in mind like consent training and unconscious bias training and critical race theory training and all these things. How do you expect that suggestion to be received by the Public Bill Committee? And have you actually been invited to give evidence in person to the committee? Because that's often a sign that they're going to take on board what your views are.
Well, the answer to that is no. I think whether they will take notice of this, I don't know. It's a more complicated issue, I think, because it goes to the heart of what a university is about. And I'll give you an example that's stronger than the ones you've just mentioned, in that if you're involved in the research excellence framework, the assessment of the quality of research in universities, which is a multi-million-pound bureaucratic exercise, that everyone involved in it had to undertake mandatory unconscious bias training. That was the way the research excellence framework organisers thought we could deal with any issues about racism or discrimination, and no one complained. All the academics that I know all took part in it, except, and I won an argument at Derby, which is that program which says, do you agree with this, do you agree with that, but we have a debate about it, to get somebody in, let's discuss it, and we did that. So it is a matter of saying, reminding people what a university is about. It's about having a debate about controversial issues, not just going through a system. And often, you can't get, these systems are brought in by consultants, they don't make a lot of sense, they're pretty crude, and they involve yes/no answers. Do you believe that multiculturalism is the way forward for society? No, you say. Wrong answer, it says. And that's how it goes. There's no choice. So you need to have...
And do you have to repeat the answer until you get it right?
Yes.
Otherwise you don't count in the evaluation exercise, and all your research goes out of the window. Is that right?
In some universities, you weren't allowed to take part unless you did this training and got through it. You weren't allowed to take part, simply. So it's not... And this was such a quiet thing. No one mentioned it. People just put up with it because it's part of the job and they want to get the research money. And I think that's half the difficulty with these issues. You have to mention the fact that these things are problematic and try and win that argument before you get an argument. So I was trying to get them to see the importance of debate, because the one thing that I don't like about the move towards the law is that it sort of sidelines debate. So the only debate you have is, does this clause apply to this case, which is not free and open debates. But I have no evidence that they've taken any notice of that whatsoever, but that's a battle people can win in their own universities. And we did have a discussion, I won't name the university, with somebody who was very annoyed about having to do unconscious bias training and wanted to do something about it. And well, I suggested to them, just organize a debate about why the controversial aspects of it. There's no point in trying to challenge it bureaucratically. If you're on a committee, the committee is going to take no notice of your challenge, or they'll just listen to you like you're another annoying person, and they'll go on with it. But if you create a debate, I mean, I used to think it was quite safe to create a debate because nobody could object to debate, could you? Let's have look at both sides of an issue. Unfortunately, that's now seemed to be something that is unacceptable as well. So you've got to be brave enough to debate. But I think that would mean that academics would have to do it. They would have to say, we don't object to this. Let's do it through debate. So the university can get the tick, but academics and others, not just academics, and the whole 50% of people in universities are not academics, and they go through the training as well. So they need to be able to challenge it, or be in a situation where someone challenges it, is brave enough to challenge it.
Indeed, and that brings us nicely on to my next question. Those with vested interests in the universities attempt to downplay the significance of cancel culture by claiming that it's rare. Do you expect that the banned list, pioneered by Academics for Academic Freedom, will be taken on board by the Public Bill Committee as giving the lie to that claim?
I think they already did that because it was mentioned in previous reports done by Eric Kaufman and another report done by Civitas. So I think they recognise that that's there, and it has become a useful source of reference. But interestingly, I did mention it at the Higher Education Policy Institute online talk. And suddenly I got lots of people criticising it on Twitter and academics, and because they said a lot of the people weren't actually banned. And of course, that is the case. You get threatened, you get demonstrations, and you get people petitioning against you, and you may not finally be banned. You may get to give your talk, but that's a really hostile environment in which to give your talk. And people believe, I mean, it's interesting, people believe you're biased. What I do on that list is try and find every case we can. We're not taking sides in the debates. So that, for instance, we mentioned, as well as Kathleen Stott, we mentioned David Miller, who's accused of he wasn't accused of anti-Semitism, but hostility to Israel and Zionism that people were worried about, made students feel unsafe. And so I mentioned the Israeli ambassador today, and I don't know if you noticed that the Cambridge Union have just decided to have a blacklist of speakers they will never invite again. So they're going to go through the people who've been there in the past, and they've never ever been invited to the Cambridge Union, which is one of the free open debate, a beacon of discussion and debate. Now it has a blacklist. So we keep putting these on, but somebody complained that we only deal with, say, Israelis who are attempted to be no platformed by Palestinian activists. That's just not true. We go through both sides, and I'd recently just put somebody down from Glasgow University who was on the opposite side. They're pro-Palestinian activists who people were campaigning against getting banned. So I think it's a weak argument to say that there weren't actually no platform. University vice chancellors love it, of course. We didn't actually no platform them, but we delayed it by 2 weeks, and there were campaigns against the speaker speaking. So in our remit for that list, we actually have that stated very clearly. It's people who've been threatened with and had campaigns against them. I mean, if you take Kathleen Stott, she was harassed at her place of work. You could say she wasn't technically no platformed, but no one's going to say that was a happy situation. So I think you have to have a broader look at how a chilling atmosphere for free speech is created on campus. And one thing that's come out in the legislation is a recognition that there is a chilling climate for free speech on campus. And the only people who deny that are the people who are quite happy to no platform. And there are still, and something I discovered over the last 6 months, there are still academics who are very keen on no platforming. always as a last resort, but nevertheless, they're still keen on it, which I thought it had disappeared almost.
So who do you think are the chief culprits here? Are the chief culprits the students themselves, the action, and what sort of prognosis do you make for the future of free speech on universities? Because, I mean, it does seem to me like the real barrier is an ideological one rather than anything else, which is why it's so hard to fight with legislation or changing arrangements or bills in Parliament or what have you. So where do you think we're going and who's to blame?
Well, I think my view on this is not that popular, is that because we have a therapeutic culture in wider society, but particularly in universities, where and although they claim to be offended, then speech has to stop. I think that is increasingly the case. So identity politics, you've hurt something that's crucial to my identity, they say, or my belief, which I believe to be absolutely true, that my ideology is being questioned. So and then debate has to stop, and that's the slightly different shift. It wasn't that we just don't like your view, the old ideological thing. We don't like you because you're a spokesperson for the Israeli government, or you're a spokesperson for Palestinian activists. That still happens, and it seems to have that form of the old politics, but it isn't. So it's shifted to much more emotional politics. So it's not emotional politics, emotional, I mean, a psychological point of view. So you've shifted from politics and ideology and philosophy, if you like, to a much more psychological approach to what's happening in universities. So, when we set up the Academics for Academic Freedom, we put on our statement, we have the right to free speech, unrestricted, whether or not our views are found to be offensive. Not saying that you should go out and offend people, that's ridiculous. But, we saw then that the cry, that's offensive, well, that hurts me, would be the way in which debate and any sort of discussion was suppressed in universities. And I think you can see with the recent obsession with mental health, and universities are now struggling to actually meet the needs of students through the various welfare bodies, because there's so many of them are claiming they've got mental health problems of various sorts after the lockdown, or because they've been out of university, or just generally. And if you keep telling people, that they're vulnerable and that they're likely to have mental health problems and then stretch the definition, so almost anything that they do that they might find stressful is seen as a mental health problem. I don't know if I gave this example last time, I'll give it again, is that I heard a student coming out of a tutorial, and she's walking along talking to a friend, and she suddenly said, that really affected my mental health. So you go to a tutorial, and instead of saying, well, we should have done more work, or next time I'm going to really to my mental health. I think it used to be stress, and it used to be anxiety and self-esteem, and now it's mental health. It's in the book, we track all the different shifts, and the newest one is the focus on mental health. And of course, if you keep saying to people that they're likely to have mental health problems, well, guess what? They start to have mental health problems. We discovered it early on. People kept saying, I feel bullied. I feel bullied when this happens. I just received a bullying email, and the language of victimhood just becomes natural. So I feel bullied. My self-esteem was hurt. I feel anxious. Now I feel mentally ill. That's the way that you now relate. I did make this point in a debate. I think I made it at Buchanan, because people think that means that people are vulnerable, that we're being aware of people's sensitivities, and the fact they need our help, or they need help from institutions. But that's not the case, because if you make that claim, you can't be challenged. It actually gives you power and authority. So if you say, I'm so upset about this, I feel I might become mentally ill, I'm so distressed, how could you possibly challenge them? Think of an academic environment I don't like what I'm hearing. It's so upsetting to me. You know, I don't know how I'll be able to cope. That gives you real power. And I think people don't recognize that about.
It's actually a form of moral coercion, isn't it?
Yes.
Dennis, what do you think is the prognosis for universities themselves? Is their heyday over, and are they now in decline? And should we mourn that, if so?
I was so pleased we were doing this interview this week because academics, in response to the lack of free speech on campus, have just set about establishing a new university, the University of Austin, which has got, you know, a large number of famous academics involved in it, if not necessarily teaching on the university. So that's one way of dealing with it. But again, this moment we're at is very unique. We're shifting from arguing for free speech to the law. Instead of arguing within universities, we've abandoned them. So that's the real change. I think people have given up on fighting for academic freedom and free speech. You know, that's a constant battle. We have to do it all the time. But I think people have got tired, and you've seen that in some of the reports that came out last year, and from think tanks like Civitas, that they just think you should have a new approach, which is a legalistic one, because academics are not going to do it. So I think that's quite interesting that the academics who most campaign on free speech have given up on academics.
How does that compare with Jonathan Haidt's Heterodox Academy? I haven't really caught up with is it the University of Austin, the new university?
University of Austin, yes. Well, it's just been announced, so nothing has really happened yet, and they're going to have a lot of technical things to deal with as well as establishing a faculty. But I think, you know, I think it's not going to be a solution. I think so. I just sorry, I missed the first part of your question there.
How does this new initiative, the University of Austin, compare with Jonathan Haidt's initiative in the States on Heterodox Academy?
There have been a few of those initiatives. I mean, I was very keen on the Heterodox Academy, and I'm a member, but it seems to have sort of stopped, really. It's the sort of organization you can join because you believe in heterodox activities, but it doesn't have the impact that, say, FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, have. So I think it's one of the good initiatives, but it's just to see where they'll go. It's the Free Speech Union in England, you know, in the UK is a parallel example, which is quite powerful. You know, people thought it wouldn't be successful, and it has over 10,000 members now. And there's, you know, and I like it because it campaigns on beyond the university for people whose free speech in wider society and in employment is threatened. So that's its strength. But all these organizations like Free Speech Champions and, you know, counterweights that Helen Pluckrose set up, there's lots of them now. And so time will tell how effective they're going to be, I think, and what will actually come out of it. But I'm quite happy, you know, let's experiment. Let's set up all these different organizations and see what happens. That can only create a healthier environment. Except, of course, the downside is you just join it and then you think you've done your bit. You know,
yes, you know, it has to be something actually active, doesn't it? Yeah. So when we talked last year, another of the things we touched on was you were saying there was an increasing interest by the public in knowledge-based education, as opposed to what you talk about in The Dangerous Rise of Therapeutic Education, which is the emotions-based education, which now seems to be implicated in what's happening at universities. So again, is that encouraging sign continue, do you think, or did that sputter out as well?
I think categorically it has sputtered out, as you say. I think it's quite difficult to assess because during the pandemic, I think it made it difficult with schools and universities closing down. It's quite hard to see. But I think generally, with the concern that Ofsted have with safeguarding, you know, with emotional safety in schools, And I think it overrides any of the moves towards knowledge-based education. So I think that developing movement is more vulnerable now than it was. But my hope is that that's temporary. Like the increase in people doing Latin and classics, that this will come back. But I think it's a matter of just waiting to see when we get back to normal, hopefully, not the new normal, to real normal. But I mean, I think about in universities, it's very much the same. We just don't know. I mean, if we do this interview again next year, we will begin to see the impact of the free speech bill. And superficially, at least, there'll be lots more statements from universities about free speech, and it will seem more positive on a rhetorical level, but let's see. So it'll take a year or more to decide both about knowledge-based education in the school sector and the defense of free speech and academic freedom, which means the defense of universities.
The trouble is, if the source of the trouble is primarily the students themselves, perhaps as a result of therapeutic education, then that's going to be much harder to overcome, isn't it?
I don't think it is the students themselves. I mean, they certainly come out of the school system feeling that they should never be offended, hence the snowflake generation from 2016. But I think academics go along with it and university administrations go along with it. So they come into an environment where everybody's happy to see them as vulnerable. Because once you see people as vulnerable and not being able to cope with things by themselves, then you can control them. And it's one of the most manipulative things you can do to young people. But as I said last time, the great thing is a lot of them don't like being manipulated and treated like children. And one of the really good things about coming back to university after the lockdown is how excited university students are about being back on campus. And we did a survey at Derby I said the Students' Union did a survey at Derby every week about what students wanted. And 90% of them or more every single week said, we want to be back on campus. So they're back on campus and they're happy and they want to work face to face with the other students and with staff. And that's a really important challenge to universities, a lot of whom would like to be online. It's cheaper, and you can deal with bigger groups without the hassle. But students won't have it. And I think that was recognised by I think Advance HE and other bodies, that the dreams of universities of going into blended systems or the best of both worlds, fine for universities, but students are saying, no, we want to be back on campus. And that's a great thing.
Dennis, is there a relationship between Academics for Academic Freedom and the Free Speech Union?
Well, as you know, I'm on the advisory board, and certainly in the early days, gave them a lot of advice, but there's no formal relationship. They're one of our friends. On our website, we have links with lots of organizations, a sort of networking system. I think that's where we are. I think our approaches slightly diverge, particularly over the total support for the Freedom of Speech Higher Education Bill. But because they believe in free speech, you have to have different views on your advisory board. But that's their view. And I think they're increasingly going down the legal route, which a lot of people like because it feels redress, whereas I think we will constantly say we have to trust academics and students and encourage them to argue and fight for free speech rather than go to court or the law or some quasi-legal system. And we have our own lawyers, not as many as the Free Speech Union, but we do have quite a few who deal with our legal cases. So we don't have a formal relationship, but we're doing the same things, but in different sectors, although they do work in universities as well.
Thinking about the people that are most active in suppressing free speech, so the people that actually draw up banned lists, things like that, what do you think their fundamental motivation of such people is? Is it political? Is it ideological? Is it psychological? Is it naivety? Or is it, as you perhaps might say, the result of therapeutic education. What do you think's the driver behind in these particular people, you know, the real zealots that lie behind it?
Well, they will say it's because of political views that they have. They will doubt, you know, if you just take if you're fighting for freedom in Palestine or wherever, whatever, you say it's political views, but it still takes that form that's slightly different now, because we don't want any offence. We're not going to have debate. So that is a shift that's happened. I mean, I used to think I was always safe arguing for free speech because I didn't actually say anything controversial, you know. But now arguing for free speech and debate is controversial. So you can be silenced by any of these groups for just wanting debate. And I think that's a shift. Before, they just want to suppress one view that they didn't like and be clear about it. But now we don't want anybody expressing any views we don't like. So it's slightly broader, I think, than just particular groups. They're all still active. They're not as active as they were. That's absolutely the case as well. So politics has collapsed into identity politics much more than theoretical politics. So I think the widespread view that you should not debate anything. And one of the things that I often see is that you have to explain to people, and I think we saw it a bit when we had some of the Battle of Ideas sessions with new audience, to understand what debate is. It's not just free expression. It's not you just saying what you think and never being challenged. And I think that's something that you need to encourage people to understand. It isn't, you know, you put your hand up and because of your identity, whatever it is, we've got to listen to you. You know, the cry, "You're not listening to me," means that, you know, you don't agree with me. That is something you must listen to me because I've got some identity status that makes me vulnerable. And it's really tough. If you want to really see how tough you standing up to somebody who says, "I want to say this because I'm a vulnerable person," is really hard. So that's a tough battle for academics, and I think that's why, and for students, I think that's why they tend to retreat from it. Because when it was just, "This is my political view," you could say, "Well, I don't agree with it. But this is my view, and it's important to me for my identity. And, you know, I'll be crushed if you say anything." Then it's really, really difficult to challenge it or say anything. And I did say this, I wanted to say to Mike, the one voice that is not heard is the voice of white men, you know, particularly middle-aged or middle-class white men, because so often in debates...
That'll be us, Dennis.
It will be you, that's true. but it's something that I've noticed, you know, when people respected people because of their status and their learning and their authority, but now it's not the case. You know, if you're white and male, you're not likely to get a hearing. Or
white male, heterosexual,
yeah,
and conservative. Oh dear.
Yeah, well, so your left wing isn't
doomed. Mike.
Yeah. Elizabeth Hobson and I recently attended the Battle of Ideas in Buxton, and we were greatly impressed with it. What are your own views on how it went, Dennis? And will there be an annual Battle of Ideas in the North from now on?
Well, I was excited about it. There was so much debate and discussion. It was a really nice feel. It was, and I think, you know, the Battle of Ideas Committee, the London-based committee, were really pleased to see a real battle happening outside London for the first time ever. You know, I think it was every debate and had really interesting points and discussion, and the feedback we have is superb from everybody. So I think it's successful. I think the difference that I think many people noticed, it was a different audience. I'd say broad sweep. We didn't do a sociological analysis of it. It was a more northern, northwestern Yorkshire working class audience, and I think that was the case at Church House for the first Battle of Ideas open for debate session. That I think there's a group of people in society, and it's not just a political group, who are desperate to say something, engage again. And I think there are different groups, and I think that's a shift, because you could say that the people who are really missing in those debates were academics. There were academics there, but often when you have a Battle of Ideas festival, your audience, you know, there's a larger majority made up of students and academics and people around universities. That's not the case anymore, and I think that's a really exciting thing. It's a new audience and a northern audience. As whether we have it again, that's a debate that has to be had both with the university and with the Academy of Ideas. And I think that's, but we did talk about it possibly. We provisionally booked it in for the 5th of November for next year, but that's just an ambition of mine, but we'll see what happens.
In anticipation of fireworks, presumably.
Well, yes. Well, we'll have them whenever we have it, as you know. Well, we had Halloween last time, so now we've got fireworks.
Last question then, Dennis. So if you had a 16 or 17-year-old son now, so I'm thinking particularly of a son rather than a daughter, how would you advise him in respect of the desirability or otherwise of going into higher education as opposed from other paths in life? I mean, leaving aside the fact that obviously he wouldn't take a blind bit of notice of his dad anyway.
Just a story is that I once had a mother get in touch with me about AFAF, and her son was going to go to university, and she'd gone through the free speech rankings. And she said, right, you're only going to apply to the 6 who've got a green. You're not allowed to go anywhere else. Didn't go down very well. So you can't choose it on free speech. I think I have a very positive view of people rather than the view that says it's better for most people to do apprenticeships. I think everybody should go to university if they can benefit from it, and they can. But they should have, I mean, there's argument about what courses you're getting, and that's the one that's coming up, whether they're worthwhile. But my advice would always be, and it has been since I talked to Chinese vice chancellors about this, and they say, where would you recommend your son and daughter to go to? Which university? And I said, never choose a university, choose an individual person who's an expert in their field, somebody whose work you really like, and go to the course that they're running. Choose that university. So choose on the basis of the academics there rather than on the university itself. So if you had a son who was keen to go, I'd say go and try and find whatever you're interested in. We'll find out who's the best person to go and study with. Actually, I had a case where a relative of mine wanted to go and do classics, and we talked about it, and she went to Cambridge because Mary Beard was there. And that's the sort of thing you should do. Go for the best people that you can find. I think I would say, though, that apprenticeships are important. I'm not against skills training at all. And Ruth Mishbuller, who gave a talk on world-class apprenticeships, made the point that at Buxton, that good apprenticeships run by companies are the best sort of apprenticeships. Right? So I think pushing young people into poor quality so-called apprenticeships, what she called fake apprenticeships, is not a good idea. Let them go to university. I think it's that famous story, every cook a politician, every person who's a postman have a degree in English. Why not? I once went to a debating matters thing, and people were, this very posh group of sixth formers at one point were really sneering at the fact that some manual worker got degrees. And I think there's no harm in everybody getting a degree, as long as it reflects the fact that they've had an education and it's not just a, what do they call it, a receipt for having paid your fees.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Dennis. That's been brilliant. Very enjoyable apart from the actual content of the answers, which you could have made a bit more joyous, to be honest.
Well, that's for
but
next
year.
Year.
We'll not hold you responsible for that.
That's for next year.
Yes, let's see what happens next year.
Yeah. And it's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.